Y'all have heard the story of Jesus calming a storm I don't know how many times, but I don't think I've ever heard the part that I just discovered. This is better than collard greens and cornbread. But before you watch, I just want to warn you, everything I'm about to serve on this plate is heavy. But if you hungry, just have a seat at the table, because this is what I call soul food. So the story opens in Mark chapter 4 by saying, that day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go to the other side. Now see, you moving too fast already. We gotta break this thing down, because anytime the Bible is that specific, it should always create a little suspicion. If the text says that day, that has to mean that there were also other things that transpired on that day, and the disciples were there to see it all. So remember that, because we're gonna come back to it later on. But now we about to come to your kitchen. Watch this. Verse 36 says, leaving the crowds behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. Doesn't seem significant, does it? But it is, because if they wanted to say hello to some new places, they had to first be willing to say goodbye to some old faces. And some of y'all may be asking this question, well, why couldn't they just bring the crowd with them? Because when you bring old faces into new spaces, you turn what God intended to be a season into a cycle. And why is that bad? Because seasons change with time, but cycles only change when you do. And if you have to go backwards in order to move forward, you're gonna miss what's ahead trying to fix what's behind. Now watch this. Notice how the Bible says they took him along. It doesn't say he took them, because no matter what form he's in, God ain't gonna invite himself into a place that you haven't first welcomed him into. So maybe the reason you haven't gotten out of your situation is because you haven't fully welcomed God into it. You keep saying it's in his hands, but you steady trying to keep control. And you've now created a state of being out of something that God intended to be a stage of life. Verse 37 says, a furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. So the very thing they were trying to stay on top of now seemed like it was on top of them. But the text says they were nearly swamped. And that's not something that happens all at once. That's a gradual process. So if they were nearly swamped, that means they really noticed that they needed help a long time ago. And my question is, what took them so long to ask? Well, if I had to guess, I would say it's probably the same thing that takes us so long. Sometimes we don't look for Jesus to help us until we realize we can't help ourselves. We would rather risk being consumed than simply calling on Christ. Speaking of Jesus, where was he when all of this was going on? He was asleep, and I don't blame him, because that sleep when it's storming be good. But the disciples said to him, teacher, do you not care if we drown? Hearing this, Jesus got up out his sleep, and when he got up, the wind ran out of breath and the waves were paralyzed. He then looked at his disciples and asked them, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Now I've said this before, but just in case you forgot, I'm gonna say it again. God is an all-knowing God. So when he asks a question, the purpose is not for him to find an answer. The purpose is for you to discover the problem. This is why I told you to remember that verse in the beginning, because Jesus didn't ask these questions to embarrass them. He asked these questions because he knew they had just spent all day watching him provide for other people, but they were filled with doubt when it came time for him to provide for them. So in other words, Jesus is saying, when I first met you, you had no faith. And I understand that, but what I don't understand is how you've been walking with me this long and you still questioning if I'm gonna take care of you. Have I not shown you enough? Has this storm caused you to forget everything we've experienced together? And to be honest, there is so much more in these 7 verses that I didn't even get to cover. But this part won't even hit home until you realize it's written about you. You've seen firsthand what God can do. So when are you gonna start believing that that same God can do it for you? Now I'm about to ask you a question and I'm going, okay? Here it is. Do you really think God would call you to the other side if he didn't think you could make it?